because I'm looking through my body, I believe that is the soul, right? The soul is tied in through the connective tissue in the body. And this tension, these adhesions are preventing the soul from feeling free. So when we let go of this tension inside, all our traumas, everything that's holding us back, we're allowing our soul to be free, to move freely within this body, in this world right now, right? And when it's free, I think it's likely to stay in the body for longer, right? When it's so tight inside, there's so much tension, eventually it gets to the point where it's just too uncomfortable to stay.
Today, I'd like to welcome Hince to the show. It's such an honor and pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks, Christine. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Yes, me too. And I'm so excited to hear your story, having no context of what that is yet. So, with that being said, let's just jump right into it and feel free to share anything about your background and your story that has led you to where you are today.
Well, maybe I should start with where I am today.
Perfect.
And then we can go back to how it started.
Awesome.
So I'm at this place that I had no idea was possible. I did not know what I can do inside of myself was at all possible, which is why I'm sharing my story, because otherwise I wouldn't need to. But I can put my awareness inside my head, inside my body, but I work mostly inside my head, and release tension in the connective tissue and the bones with focused attention or focused awareness. And I've actually shifted my skull bones, I've aligned my eye sockets, my jawbone has shifted, my neck has straightened, I've grown or decompressed 3/4 of an inch in my 50s. So it blows my mind how powerful it is. Like what I can do every day, it just blows my mind. It's like, because I can hear the shifts, I can hear the releases of the adhesions and the connective tissue, I can hear my neck cracking.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know that this was possible, but it's been a journey. It's been, a 20-year journey actually. So so that's where I am
I
now.
was just going to ask you, how do we do this? Because I have recently injured my hip. I started training for a marathon on April 6th, and my hip is causing me not to be able to run, and it's driving me insane. So really, really curious now about this process.
Okay, so it didn't start at the physical level at all. It
Got it.
started with memories and with traumas and emotions, and it kind of that's how my self-awareness deepened, right? I didn't even know what self-awareness meant at the beginning of this journey, but I just knew I was just so reactionary. I was so afraid all the time. I had complex PTSD from two alcoholic parents, one of which was very angry, and I was just afraid all the time. And I knew I had to change. I had to find something so that I would be different. I had to be different. And that's what started my journey.
Yeah. As a recovered alcoholic addict and recovered from an eating disorder, I can 100% relate to that. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew something was wrong, and I knew that there was something better somewhere.
Right. So you were determined to change. Yes.
Yes, there
Yes.
was definitely a motivation for a
Right.
different experience.
Yeah. That's what I found. There has to be a will. You have to really want something to change, and you have to be willing to spend the time and effort that it takes to make those changes.
Yes, absolutely. I agree for
So
sure.
for me, it was like a what I call a business altercation with two other mothers at my boys' school. And so I'm in my late 30s at this point when this happened. And they told me I'd done something wrong. I'd made a wrong decision. And my mind just spun out of control because these women were self confident, self assured, authority type women in my mind. And I was this scared mother on the inside. And they told me I'd done something wrong. And
Wow.
I could not stop my mind spinning. It was like 3 days of just going over what I'd said, what they had said, I did, what I could have done differently, just all these different permutations. And it was at the end of those 3 days that I realized, first of all, this is not normal. And most people do not react this intensely to something that really wasn't a big deal. And I realized it felt a little bit like how I would react when my dad would tell me I'd done something wrong. So that was the first little inkling that maybe my childhood was still affecting me to this day.
Right.
But I didn't know what to do about it. But that was the opening to start looking at least.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I can do the same thing where I hear something and I just can't get it out of my head. And for me, that creates some tension. And when there's tension, I notice I'm always reaching for relief. And I used to reach for relief in ways that were not so healthy. And now I reach for relief in ways of actual healing.
Nice. Yeah, we're very programmed to look the opposite direction.
Yes, yes. And I can relate to feeling like you did something wrong and having someone say it, how it could register into that programming that, somewhere we've done something wrong or we're inherently wrong. So I appreciate you sharing and being so open and vulnerable.
That's part of this journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I didn't know what to do at the time, but I knew I had to change. I so had to change, and it was in that time frame that I went to a doctor's appointment. And he was a holistic physician, so he had more tools in his toolbox than many doctors do. And he recognized that I was stressed. I wasn't going there for stress. I wasn't going there. I can't remember why I was going there, but it was nothing to do with my mental health. But he recognized I was stressed, and he asked me on a scale of 0 to 10 what my stress level was, and I said 8. And then he asked me why. And it was that question that made me realize, oh, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor when I was 19, which was 2 decades before, because the tears from that event were still just under the surface all those years later. I hadn't dealt with it at all. And he happened to know this technique that's called EFT, which is short for emotional freedom technique. It's also called tapping because we're tapping on certain places as we're talking something through. So he tapped with me about my mother's death for about 15 minutes. And I walked away from that appointment being able to tell the story in my mind for the first time ever without those tears there. And that was the first time I realized that we hold all those memories and those emotions physically in our body and that we can let them go. I didn't know up to that point that that was possible.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I actually have had some exposure to tapping and I can testify to the power of it. I honestly, I don't really understand the mechanics. I just know a little bit about how it kind of reprograms our meridians or something to that effect. I'd love it if you would explain to us what EFT actually is and how it works.
Okay. Okay. So it's a little bit like acupressure, right? Because we're tapping on meridian points. And
Mhm.
what the tapping does is it kind of puts an interrupt into the nervous system. So if you're bringing up a memory and you have, the thoughts and the memories and the emotions that are attached to that memory, we automatically go back into how we were feeling at that point. When we're tapping, we're interrupting that nervous system, which allows the energy from those emotions to dissipate, to just release. So it's not actually reprogramming, it's just kind of clearing out what's stuck inside of us. So that the power of EFT is working with the negative. A lot of people these days have moved towards the positive or trying to reprogram. But because I can sense inside my body now, I know the tension is the darkness. Those are the traumas that we're looking for. We're looking for the darkness, we're looking for the negative. As we release the negative, it's already light underneath, right? The light is already there underneath the darkness. So all we have to do is find the darkness and heal it or clear it out. And that's what EFT is so powerful at doing, because it's working on that tension, which is the darkness stored inside.
I love how you said that. I want to highlight that there's already light inside, that there's already light. And I'm a big I don't like this whole positivity thing. I do practice, shifting from negative to positive, but I think that there is actually a lot of juice in the negative. It shows us, where our mind is or what is there to be healed. And from a different perspective, I've always said we can't actually heal it if we don't feel it. and we can't shine light on it if it's stuck in the dark. And so I love how you explained that. And I'm curious now what opened up for you, not just being able to tell the story without tears, but what else opened up for you as a result of this newfound practice?
Well, just that one experience was a little bit freeing, right? I felt a little bit lighter than I had ever done before. So I actually went home and I learned all about it because I have an engineering background. I didn't necessarily believe that that one session with this really weird technique was going to do anything. So I learned everything I could about it because it was given away by Gary Craig, who developed it for free. So
Mm,
anyone can learn it.
yeah.
But I wanted to try it out on something else. So I had a 17-year-old cat at home at the time, and his kidneys were starting to fail. So we were told, well, I was told that I had to give him a daily saline shot, so an injection of saline solution, and I hated needles. So the first time I gave him that shot, my hand was shaking so badly. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it every day because I had to do it every day. And so I thought, okay, well, this is a great just idea to tap on, to try out this technique. So I
Mm,
did. So I tapped about every aspect of it, which is something you do with EFT. So I tapped about my hand shaking. I tapped about my fear of hurting my cat. And I tapped about all the injections that I had had over the years, which had been many.
yeah.
And the next day, when I gave him that shot, the needle just slid right in. All that fear that had been living inside of me the day before had totally disappeared. So that's when I realized some things. I realized, first of all, EFT is deceptively powerful. It doesn't
Mm,
look like it's doing much, but boy, it is.
yeah.
But I also realized the freedom that I was looking for was on the other side of that fear, of those emotions, and that it's just energy that's stuck in our body. And if I can find it, if I can dig it out and release it, then that's the piece that I'm looking for.
Yeah. Wow, that's really, really powerful. And I'm curious about the fear. So, one of the things that I believe and operate from when I'm working on my own stuff or working with clients as a coach is that, and I think I already said this, that we have to feel it in order to heal it. And so, what I'm imagining is that a little bit about what I know about EFT and what you had said is that we have to bring it up. So, do we have to bring that feeling to the surface before we start tapping in order to release it? Or can we just tap on it without actually having to feel it?
Well, it's very subtle, right? The difference is so,
Yeah.
and it's all based on self awareness, right? When I started this journey, I did not have any self awareness really. If someone
Mm,
asked me how I was feeling, I really didn't know because I'd just suppressed it all for so long, so well. I was
right.
really good at it. And I think a lot of us are. So when I started, it was just the words, right? Just the memories, the parts of the memories that I could remember, I would tap using those words. Now, the words, the memories are connected to the emotions. So they will be felt on some level, even if we're not consciously aware of them through the words, right? So as we do more and more tapping, it becomes more obvious to us, right? Because we've opened up to it, so we become aware more of the emotions, and we can sit in them more, and we can talk through the emotions, we can describe them with our words, right? Like, I'm feeling this frustration in my solar plexus, in my rib cage. But to begin with, we're not aware, or at least I was not aware at that level. But what I realized EFT is doing, it's opening up the subconscious mind, and going hand in hand with that is a deepening of our self-awareness, that they're kind of one and the same thing. So like I had to go back and tap through my mother's death multiple more times because
Right.
that 15-minute session just kind of let go of the big emotions that I'd been just stuffing down. So I tapped through it again from the beginning to the end, and more details would come up, right? More suppressed emotions that maybe had been hidden before, but I couldn't access them because they were hidden underneath the big emotions, and more details of the story, right? So that's the subconscious mind opening up. So I would go through the story from the beginning to the end, over and over, until it was totally cleared out of emotion, right? So I could tell the story in detail from beginning to end with no emotions left inside of me. And that's when I know it's cleared out.
What I was imagining was that there are layers to these memories and these emotions that we have chosen not to feel. So we just kind of push them down. And then every tapping session just peels away another layer and more light shines through and through and through.
Absolutely. What we don't know at the beginning, because it's all stuck in our subconscious mind, we have no idea of the number of layers that are in there.
Right.
So I actually felt shifts happening, right? So as I was doing this, I started to become, or I would ask myself during the day, how am I feeling right now? And do I want to feel this way again? And normally the answer was no, I don't. So then I would tap. I'd bring myself back from wherever I was feeling back to peace. And then I'd carry on with my day. So
Mhm.
that in itself takes some work, right? To become aware of the emotions during the day. And I noticed things changing. I noticed myself getting less reactionary, but I wanted it to go faster and I wanted it to be more. So I wrote down every emotional trauma that I could think of for my life, multiple pages of paper. And I tapped through one each night for about an hour to an hour and a half each night because I was determined. And as I did that, things just started changing faster. My mind, which had been so judgmental and so self critical and critical of other people, became quiet. And I'd never experienced that before. You know, I'd heard people talk about it, but to actually experience it when you're used to a busy mind was just amazing. It actually felt like I was living in a different reality. But that's
Mm.
when I realized that those thoughts, those judgments, those criticisms had been my dad's and they'd been programmed into me in childhood, and I just repeated them as mine. But I couldn't see that until they were gone.
Right. Wow. That is really fascinating. I love that, as an addict, I have a monkey mind and it's very, very active. And I know what it's like to have it finally quiet down and experience peace when you haven't experienced that before. So this is also fascinating to me. And I have so many questions because in my experience, when I have tried to learn tapping, I can never remember how to word and how to actually do it. So I always just go to YouTube and I search EFT tapping and I try to find a similar topic to what I am experiencing or what I'm wanting to release or um, heal from. And so I'm curious if you would walk us through maybe some of the things that we can, like, can we tap on everything, or is it just certain like things, certain emotions, or is it everything? And maybe give us a little sample of how we can actually do it.
Sure, I've definitely got a few things to say there. Okay.
Okay.
First of all, the other power in EFT, it's not just working on a negative, which is where the power is, but it's also using our own words because we resonate with our own words, right? When we don't necessarily resonate with someone else's. So keep that in mind. I do have a video on my YouTube channel about finding the words to use with EFT. And the key thing is you're trying to find the words that bring up the emotions, right? So if tears start flowing, I know it sounds like it's not a nice thing to do, but we keep using the words that keep the tears flowing because they will eventually stop.
Yeah.
So that's the words we're using. We can work on anything, right? So if you've got a monkey mind and it's just going, and it won't stop, you can just tap and tap on the thoughts that you're having. Because I know you talk about accepting how you're feeling or the thoughts you're having. So if you acknowledge them and you tap as you're having those thoughts, it releases the hold they have on you. And eventually the thoughts stop coming. So
Very,
it's very simple, really. It's all about just learning the points, and there aren't that many of them.
okay.
And there's a setup phrase in EFT. Again, I'm not all that I don't worry about it. And the phrase I use is different from the official one because I found there was so much resistance to the original one that people couldn't actually then focus on what they were tapping about. So the way I say it is, and maybe we'll work on something like, I'm afraid of making a phone call, right? So it's a fear of making a phone call. I would just, the first point is the karate chop point on the side of the hand.
Uh-huh.
You just tap on it. It's not so gentle that it's not doing anything, right? We're trying to make an interrupt in the nervous system, but we don't want to hurt ourselves. So just a medium tap.
Okay.
And I would say something like, I'm afraid of making this phone call. And that's my truth in this moment. And it's okay that I'm feeling this way.
Got it.
Right. So you can say that 3 times if you want, but we'll carry
Yep.
on. And the next point is the crown point on the top of the head. And I just say, I'm afraid of making this phone call. So I'm saying my truth. The words are actually my truth right now. The next point is the beginning of the eyebrow. I'm afraid of making this phone call. The next point is the bone on the edge of the eye. I'm afraid of making this phone call. Next point is the bone under the eye. I'm afraid of making this phone call. Now, I could expand on the words. Why am I afraid? Well, I'm afraid because I don't know what they're going to say, or they may shout at me, right? So if those thoughts come up, I can add that. I'm afraid of making the phone call because they might shout at me. So that's the next point, under the nose on the upper lip. The next one's on the chin. I'm afraid of making this phone call. The next one is the collarbone, beginning of the collarbone, just underneath it. I'm afraid of making this phone call. And then the last point is underneath the armpit, about 3.5 inches or so, where the bra strap goes across, if you have one. I'm afraid of making this phone call. And then you take a deep breath. You let it out. And that is one round of EFT. And
Got
you
it.
just keep going until the fear has dissipated, or maybe another emotion or another memory will come up, and then you
Okay.
can tap through that. And that's kind of how you unwind the whole body.
Yeah. I'm not afraid of making a phone call, but just doing one round, I do feel different. Like
Good. And
something feels different.
you have a depth of self-awareness, right? So you're
Yes.
fairly aware at deeper level. So some people may not, but just know, even if you don't, there
Right.
will have been a shift. You're
Yeah.
just not aware of it yet. But as we
Yeah.
do more and more of this work, our awareness deepens. So we become aware of the emotions, and then we become aware of the physical sensations underneath the emotions, right? And
Yeah.
know you're aware at that level. But that's something like, if I'm feeling frustration, where am I feeling that frustration? There's actually tension inside the body that we
Mhm.
then call frustration, right? We dissociate from the feelings and we use the word, but we can reverse that process and become aware of that tension inside. And that's where I didn't need to use EFT at that point as much, but I
Mhm.
started to do what I call feeling your feelings, which I know you're aware of. But I couldn't do it to begin with, right? I had to become aware of my feelings.
Yeah.
And then I started to do that.
Yeah. And so I'm curious because all of this is so fascinating to me. And I had a level of self-awareness prior to being exposed to tapping. And yes, I'm very, very self-aware. And feeling is something that I've had to do. When you take away addiction and you take away vices, you're only left with feeling. You're forced to. And so I'm just curious if you could maybe elaborate on how EFT can actually help us become aware of our feeling. Like, for example, you said, just start wherever your truth is. So if I'm just feeling anxious and I don't know why, what would be the process of, going through the tapping if I don't know that it's a phone call or something that's causing me to be anxious? I just know I don't like the way I feel.
That's where you start. You start, I don't know, I don't like the way I feel, or I'm
I don't
feeling
like the way I
anxious,
feel.
right?
Okay.
Or if I
Yeah.
know I'm feeling anxious, I can tap on, I'm feeling anxious, but I don't know why, right? That's the
Got it.
truth. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes we don't see the truth, right? And
Yeah.
that holds us back, right? So a lot of people are afraid of starting this work.
Uh-huh.
If that's the case, that's your truth. I'm afraid of doing this. I'm afraid of what will come up, is what you would tap on,
Yeah.
because that's where you are right now.
Right.
So yeah, it's really interesting to watch people just not see their truth in the moment, right? And
Mhm.
so it stops them doing things because they they don't know their truth in the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I suggest people just imagine you're talking to me.
Mhm.
Imagine you calling me up and saying what's happening.
Right.
Tap on that, right? Tap on
Yeah.
what you would tell a friend who's not going to judge you. Those are the words you would use to tap.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to go deeper, that's when I wrote down all my traumas and I went through one each time. I just brought the memory back to mind and tapped through it from beginning to end, beginning
Mhm.
to end, beginning to end, over and over until there was no energy left. And that included things like, phrases my dad would use, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about, right? Yeah, my aunt used to always say, you should be ashamed of yourself. So that was a phrase that I would tap on so that that phrase no longer has any meaning to me. One of the
Right.
phrases that after I got through all these traumas and I got deeper, I tapped on I hate myself because that was a truth that was hidden quite a long way down,
Yeah.
but it had a lot of emotion in it. And I tapped on that phrase for many hours over a period of time. I don't remember how long,
Yeah.
until they just became 3 words, right? I hate myself.
Mhm.
There's no longer any attachment, any emotional attachment to that phrase anymore, which is
Yeah.
very freeing.
Yeah. I notice I have several curiosities arising right now. And the first one is, so let's say I hate myself. We're tapping on that, which uh, from my experience, I would imagine that would be a very, very deeply hidden feeling or experience. And what I've seen in the past, and like I said, I'm not an expert, I've just been exposed to EFT. There's a round where they put like a positive affirmation in there. Do you have to, after you would tap on I hate myself, do you also like, is it advised to go back and say, I love myself?
I don't, because as I said, all we need to do is find the darkness and the light's
Right.
already underneath.
Because it's already
So,
there. Yeah.
right, there's likely to be resistance to saying I love myself.
Yeah.
Right? If we've been sitting in I hate myself, then going to I love myself, we can keep tapping on that because it will bring up the resistance. It will work on the resistance to that.
Right.
But I don't do that personally.
Yeah. I love how you said that. It is a far jump from I hate myself to I love myself. And so I can see the benefit of just tapping and interrupting that train of thought or that deep patterning that would say something like, I hate myself, and then have it release to where there's space now to love yourself. But I love that you said that too, that the light is already there. So I believe we are love and we don't have to love ourselves because when we reveal the light and the truth of who we are, we see that we are just love. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, I'm just trying to find peace. So to me,
Right.
peace isn't right. It's not loving myself. It's just being totally at peace with myself.
Yeah.
So to me, that kind of feels like more the middle road.
For sure, for sure. Now, you said we can do this on anything. So, is it possible to tap on physical pain?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's many aspects to that, right?
Uh-huh.
But if we're aware of the physical pain, we can tap on, I've got this pain in my hip, right?
Yes.
And it's so intense. And you
Yeah.
use the words to focus your mind on that area in the body, right?
Got
Because
it.
it once attention is calling for attention, the pain is calling for attention. So this is a
Mhm.
way to focus on it. So you describe it to yourself as you're feeling into it.
Mhm.
What does it feel like? Where are you feeling it exactly?
Mhm.
But then there's other aspects to it. It's like, when
Okay.
did it start? Right?
Yeah.
Were you trying to do something at that moment that that maybe you shouldn't have? So then you would tap through that experience over
Okay.
and over again from beginning to end until there's no emotion left in it,
Got it.
right? And also, did something major happen prior to that, right? In the 6 months or so prior to that, some major trauma that you don't want to look at or you haven't looked at yet, right? You'd
Right.
also want to tap through that. So you want to clear all the aspects around it. Maybe there's some fear of doing the marathon, right? Maybe
Right.
some fear of the future, and that was kind of a
Yeah.
way to stop you having to do it, perhaps, or so that you
Right.
didn't have to train as hard. All those different aspects we have to fess up to, right? And we can tap
Yeah.
on them.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that because I believe that any physical manifestation is actually some cause of the mind or the metaphysical. And so every time I have a physical ailment, I look up Louise Hayes. She has a book about metaphysical causations, and the hip is actually the fear of moving forward and the fear of the future. And so, as you were saying that, I feel sad. Like, I'm really sad that I can't run, and it's driving me crazy that I can't actually take a full step without pain yet. And the doctor said, 4 to 6 weeks. So, this nothing major happened. I just started training and I ramped up too quickly. And so,
That's what
about two
happened.
weeks ago, huh?
That's what happened. I ramped up
Yes,
too quickly, right? That's what you would tap on. I ramped
I
up too
ramped up too
quickly.
quickly.
I
Okay.
ramped up too quickly. It was too much. It was clearly too much for my body.
It was too much. Yes. And I've been in denial about that. And so, but I think, there might be a little bit of fear of, this 26.2 miles, even though I've been pushing back on the collective conditioning that 26.2 miles is extremely, intense or an extremely long distance to run. There might actually be some there. So I am going to tap away today because I want to get back to running.
Yeah, so maybe write down everything, right? All those beliefs and all those
Right.
fears, right? And go through one at a time.
Yes. Yeah. And now I'm curious if you have an answer for this because I actually have been going to several doctors and I've gotten different opinions and I really don't actually believe in Western medicine until it's like absolutely necessary. And so I'm curious if you have any insight as to um the metaphysical pieces of physical pain and why tapping works.
Well, that gives you another word to tap on, by the way. You could tap
Right.
on the word sciatica or whatever they say, right? Because
Yeah.
we probably all got some memory or some history around the words that are used.
Right.
So that would be something else to
Yeah.
tap on.
Yeah.
I know from my journey that it's all connected, right?
Mhm.
So we've only really talked about the first step on my journey, which was the EFT. And I didn't really get the full understanding until I got to the third step on my journey,
Got it.
right? Where should I pop there now
Yeah,
and
let's
just
go there
say, so
now.
because I can put my awareness right inside my body,
Okay.
I know that it's all the dis-ease inside is stored as tension. It's tension in the connective tissue and it's pain that's also in there. And it's just a deeper level of self-awareness. So even if it's pain that we're feeling, it's also connected to the words and the memories, right? That all the steps on my journey, we're just doing the same thing at a deeper level of self-awareness. It starts with memories and emotions and words, and then it becomes sensations, and then it's actually inside the body, but it's all the same thing. There's just a deeper level of self-awareness. So even if you're only conscious of some trauma that happened in your past, but you can't feel the sensations or the emotions or the physicalness of it, it's still there. You're just not aware of it. So pain, right, when you're aware of physical pain, it's just a deeper level of self-awareness of what's going on.
Yeah, that makes so much sense because it's like when we feel emotional pain, pain is pain. And so emotions, like I imagine I mean, they do live in our cells, but it's like in our thoughts, and our thoughts can create our feelings based on our judgments. And so I can see how getting into the pain that's in my hip is just going deeper into being aware of what's happening in my whole body and my whole energy field all together. That's so fascinating.
Yeah. So let's go into feeling feelings because
Okay,
I know you got your
absolutely.
story of it. Let me
Yes.
share mine. So I was in a group at the time. We were studying A Course in Miracles, and this was when I was just starting with the EFT journey. So inside the group, we were doing this work. Outside the group, I was doing EFT and tapping. And the guru in this group, the kind of the head guy, every week he would say, "You don't need to meditate. It's all about feeling your feelings." But at the beginning, I didn't know what he meant because I didn't know what my feelings were. But as the weeks went by, and he said this every week, I thought one day, after I'd done a lot of the EFT, I thought, okay, let me try and do what he's saying because he says it every week, right? It must mean something. So one day I was doing the dishes at the kitchen sink and I caught a thought, right? I noticed a thought that had some emotion attached. And let's go back to maybe it was the phone call that I was afraid of. So I thought, okay, how do I feel these feelings? I know where the sensations of fear were. For me, they're in the solar plexus. So I tried to feel them, but I was so good at suppressing them. I didn't know how to relax or to feel that feeling. So I had to hold my breath. I had to hold myself like a statue, focus on that fear, so the sensation of fear in my solar plexus, and I had to stop in my breath right where I could feel it, because if I took another breath or if I moved, my focus would move and I couldn't find that fear again. So I would hold myself like a statue and just feel that fear, and I would talk to it. So I would say things like, okay, I can feel you right there in my solar plexus. I just want to feel you. I just want to allow you to be felt. I don't want to change you. I just want to feel you. And at some point, I would have to take a deep breath because I've been holding my breath. But I would notice that the fear would have dissipated slightly. So then I'd bring the same thought back to mind. I'm afraid of making this phone call. Find that fear in my solar plexus. Hold my breath. Stand like a statue and just focus on that fear. And I would do that again and again and again until the fear had dissipated, right? At which point it becomes easy to make the phone call. So I started doing that every day instead of EFT. Now, I was a stay at home mother, so it was easier for me to just find the time during the day just to notice the thought, feel the emotion, and allow it to release. But I became good at it, right? It became easier. Those emotions felt a little bit freer, right? I could release them a little bit more. They weren't as scared of being felt. So it
Right.
was definitely a process.
Yeah. And so, just to kind of recap, this ability to pause and feel the feeling that was arising was came after the EFT practice, where you created some more um, space and maybe safety in feeling.
Yeah, taking off those layers and layers and layers just opened up my self-awareness, right? So I became aware of those sensations because I wasn't before. So I didn't have the opportunity to feel them in the past until I got to this place where I knew where they were, and then I could work with them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm curious what your perspective is. I have a lot to say about feeling our feelings, but I'm curious what you would have to say about why it's so important to feel.
Because it's tension, it's dis-ease stuck inside of us, and it affects us every day. It affects us now, and because we're emitting a signal and we're tuning back into whatever, it affects what we're picking up. So it affects the thoughts we're thinking, it affects our future, it affects everything. And we haven't got into my third step yet, but when we do, it's like there is so much tension stored inside that is pulling us out of alignment, right? We use the term alignment in terms of thoughts and law of attraction and stuff, but our physical alignment is massive. It's just, we're so pulled out of alignment and we're just not aware of it until we are.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to hear the third step. And before we go there, I just want to ask you this. So, when we have an experience and we choose not to feel the effect of that experience in the moment, it doesn't actually go away until we feel it. Would you say that's correct? I'd love for you to speak on that for a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think all the tears that we never shed in childhood are still inside of us. And if we access those memories, they will come out. So, yes. And just imagine the forces that we're having to use to hold those tears inside still, right?
Yeah.
That's got to make such a difference to us. So, yes, yeah, we have to feel those feelings. Otherwise, they just stored inside as tension.
Yeah. I just want to say this when you said all the tears that we would have cried in our childhood are still in us. When I first got sober in December of 2013, I was pregnant, so I was hormonal, but having putting a halt on drinking and using any kind of substances, I cried for about a month.
That's good. You let go of a lot of pressure.
I did. No, I would ask, I'm like, why am I still crying? Like, I didn't even know most of the time why I was crying. And at the time, I was just like, well, I'm pregnant, I'm hormonal. But
And they did
it
stop,
was
right?
the halt of like, I stopped numbing, I stopped pushing, I stopped that. And so the only place to go were for the tears to flow like waterfall.
But they did eventually stop. Yep.
Yes,
Yes, they always do.
I still cry a lot, but
I used to, but I don't anymore. I mean, I
mm,
rarely do anymore, and it's actually kind of fun not
yeah,
not to be
not
swayed
to
by
cry.
my emotions. Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious about the third step of your story and process.
Okay, so I was doing the feelings, and I would lay on the sofa at night. And because I'd already done my childhood traumas and things, I worked on more collective traumas. So things like 9/11, right? We all have our own personal experience of that event. So I would bring those memories to mind, maybe even play a video, right, to bring it back and just feel the feelings, just allow the decompression of all those emotions that had been stored inside. And at some point during that journey, I realized I could keep my awareness inside my body after the tension had released. So I'd been focusing on the sensations, but I could actually feel inside my body. And it sounds such a weird thing to say, and I know that, but it was very weird for me too, right? I'd never experienced it, I'd never heard of it, didn't know what I was doing. So
Right.
I tried again and I realized I could do it again. And then I started to play. So what can I do? And I realized I could move my awareness around. I was working in my lower right abdomen at the time. I could move my awareness around and I could notice where there was tension versus no tension. Right? I could feel a difference inside.
Yeah.
So I would focus on the tension, doing exactly the same thing, feeling it, just allowing it to be, just noticing it, giving it the attention it was wanting, and I would feel a release. So I would do it over and over again. So same thing, EFT is just working outside with memories and thoughts and emotions, and feeling the feelings is working on the sensations. Now I'm just inside doing the same thing. And I would just move around my torso, feeling for tension, noticing where it was and trying to release it. And it took many, many months, but eventually I could put my awareness inside my head. And that was huge because the pain and the tension inside my left cheek was just, it was almost unbearable. It was so intense. And I realized it had been there ever since I was born, because I was born with my right foot up against my right shin. So I had 6 weeks of kind of physical therapy before I was handed over for adoption. So that my whole body was torqued from that of scoliosis and such. And it led up to this pain in my cheek, but
Yeah.
it had been there my whole life, right? It was so intense. It had been stuck inside of my subconscious mind until I was aware of it. So then I just carried on. I'd got this technique now, right? So I knew what to do. So I would focus on it for a second and just, go on with my life, and then focus on it for another couple of seconds. And just over the times, I actually started to, well, one time in particular, the first time, I actually heard and felt something release. It was a little scary, didn't know what it was. I actually went home, did some research, realized it was an adhesion in the connective tissue that was releasing. So I wasn't hurting myself. And I kept going. I kept feeling more and more releases just throughout my head. And eventually got to the place where I could actually feel my skull bones relax. Now I hadn't known they weren't relaxed before, right? Because it was hidden from me. But once it relaxed, it was kind of cool to feel that. And I did eventually have X-rays taken from my orthodontist. But because I had felt changes happening, I knew things were changing. So I thought, well, okay, let me look at the prior X-rays, which were from 8 years prior to that. And I could see the changes. I could see that my eye sockets had shifted. My jaw, which was way off to the side, is much more centered now. My neck is straighter than it's ever been in my life. And I've grown 3/4 of an inch because of that decompression of that tension, that letting go of the burden that I've been carrying. That's what we can do.
Wow, that is so fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. I notice I'm really curious. Do you teach people this? Do you work with people one-on-one or teach people how to do what you did?
I do some one-on-one work, but I did write a book that has all this information, and I have a YouTube channel which has all this information. So um, yeah, I want other people to get here because I want to have some deep conversations with other people who are here too.
Yeah, I just what I'm really tuning into right now is just the space and the freedom that can be achieved really on our own without having to do or I mean, I guess there is some action, right? Like we have to pause and tune in and feel. But, in this process of my hip, I'm aware it's much more than what's actually happening in my hip. But when I go to the doctors, I get frustrated because I'm getting two different opinions and I just want an MRI, but all these things. And really, all we have to do is go inward. And what's possible as a result of that is feeling good. And it just feels like an immense amount of freedom available.
Absolutely. Now, one thing about the hip or with pain in general,
Mhm.
physical pain, is when you start doing this work, right? When you start feeling the feeling or just sitting in that pain and
Yeah.
trying to relax into it, it can get more intense to begin with because you're clearing away the chaff that's around it, right? The veil that's covering the actual pinpoint of pain itself. So
Yeah.
just know that ahead of time. You might think something's going wrong, but you're actually focusing in on it more, and it just needs focused attention.
Yeah. I'm giggling because about 3 or 4 days ago, I had been resisting the pain and resisting that there was even something wrong and that in 2 days it was going to feel better and I was going to be able to go for a run. I mean, it was just resistance. And I think it was Friday morning. So today's Tuesday. I think Friday morning, I was like, okay, I just need to accept this. And as I accepted it, I actually felt more pain over the weekend until today. Today's the first day that the pain has lightened. And so as you were saying that, I was like, yes, that's exactly been my experience that as I moved into acceptance, okay, like I was frustrated that I just, can't get up and do daily things. Like I'm an active person. So having to park it on my couch is really not in alignment with who I am. So having to accept that was really hard. It took over a week to finally be able to accept it. But when I did, the pain got worse. And I thought that I was doing something wrong, actually. So I'm feeling comfort in what you shared.
Good.
Yeah. So this has been so fascinating. And I am going to include the link to your book as well as the link to your YouTube channel and anything else that you want me to include. So if people want to find your book, learn how, and follow along on your YouTube, they can. I do have a couple of questions that I ask all my guests, but before we go there, I'm curious if there's anything else that you want to share about your journey, your story, or anything we've talked about today, or something we haven't talked about today.
Okay. um, well, there's definitely more things that we could talk about, but we don't need to. But and that is the more spiritual aspect of it.
Mhm.
But one of the things I love to share with people is that there is so much more depth to life than we ever know about, right? Until we do this work. Because the deeper we know ourselves inside, the deeper we see, or the more we see in life outside of ourselves. So
Yeah.
if anyone's depressed, right, or thinking, is there anything more to this life? Then, I encourage you to start doing this work because I had no idea how much there was that we could access through doing this work before I started, right? You just got to start. And then you've got perspective, right? Then you can look back and see where you were, right? Where you've come to, and you're able to see in more perspectives, right? physically, my neck will move in all sorts of different ways that it would not move before. It was kind of stuck on my right hand side. So when you change your perspective, right, it's both a mental perspective and a physical perspective. And it just makes life so much more fun.
Thank you. I noticed feeling really curious about what you would have to say about the spiritual aspect. And I imagine that we could dive really deep into that. But my audience is also very spiritual. So I'd love it if you could offer a little bit about the spiritual aspect as well.
Okay, I'll make it short. I believe because I'm looking through my body, I believe that is the soul, right? The soul is tied in through the connective tissue in the body. And this tension, these adhesions, are preventing the soul from feeling free. So when we let go of this tension inside, all our traumas, everything that's holding us back, we're allowing our soul to be free, to move freely within this body, in this world right now, right? And when it's free, I think it's likely to stay in the body for longer, right? When it's so tight inside, there's so much tension, eventually it gets to the point where it's just too uncomfortable to stay. So I think that is part of this work. I think that is the soul, what we talk about as the soul. And I'm looking from, I know kind of where I'm looking from inside of my head. And, I think that's where the soul resides, but then moves through the body. And as I said, I think we're tuning in to spirit. So when we're a clear vessel, right, we're able to tune into spirit much more readily. And what comes through is our natural self, right? If we got tension inside, that distortion of the signal is our ego manifesting.
Right.
Right. So as we're letting this tension go, we're actually letting our ego go and we're tuning into spirit more easily.
Right. I know you mentioned A Course in Miracles earlier, and I'm a huge course student and teacher. And I just want to add to what you just said. When we're in alignment with our soul and with, I'm going to use the word God, God's will, we're happy, joyous, and free. And if we have emotions that are causing anxiety or sadness or depression or anger, we're not happy, joyous, and free. If we're having physical pain, we're not happy, joyous, and free. And so clearing out that whatever's in the way allows us to be in alignment and be happy, joyous, and free and have our soul move freely through this world. So thank you so much for that. I love everything spiritual. So I was like, wait, we have to include it.
Good.
So, and I do have 3 questions that I ask all my guests. The first question is, how would you define God or source?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I'm not religious at all,
Yep,
from my
me neither.
past, and so I'm just trying to work my story in with what we hear from other people, and so I know we're tuned into something. What that is exactly, I don't know. That could be source, but I also think based on a lot of the symbology that I see outside and the Bible, which I don't really read, but I look into sometimes, that God resides inside our skull, which I believe is the Holy Land, because it's a land full of holes, it's bone full of holes. Whether that God that sits inside of us, inside the kingdom of God, is different from the source that we're tuning into, that's what I don't know at this point.
Yeah, I love that answer. Thank you so much. The second question is, what would you say is the purpose of life?
To find peace beyond understanding, right? To go on this journey and get as far as you can, hopefully to the end. I think there's an end to this journey, and I hope to find it at some point.
Yeah, I hope so. And the final question is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer it to a younger version of yourself, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
It would be to learn to feel your feelings and not stuff them.
Thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation. I feel like I've learned so much. So I'm sure the audience has also learned so much. And again, I'll include the links to your book and to your YouTube channel. And are there any other ways to get in touch with you or find you aside from the book and the YouTube channel?
I'm pretty active on Facebook, so you're welcome to find me there and interact with me there. I've also got my website, which has the x-rays on, so if anyone's interested in seeing the x-rays there, they're definitely
Awesome.
there.
Awesome. I'll include links to both. This has been such an honor, so much fun, and I'm so happy that you joined me today. It was so great to have you share your wisdom and your experience with the world. And I know that a lot of people will get a lot out of this. So thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.